Here was the secret of happiness, about which philosophers had disputed for so many ages, at once discovered. Happiness might now be bought for a penny and carried in the waistcoat pocket. Portable ecstasies might be had corked up in a pint bottle. A piece of mind could be sent down in gallons by the mail coach. This is an excerpt from a passage in Thomas de Quincy's 1821 Autobiography, Confessions of an Opium Eater. In it, as the name already reveals, de Quincy shares his experiences with opium. Opium, also known as Lachryma papaveris or poppy tears, is the name of the latex contained in the seed pod of the opium poppy. It's an extremely addictive opioid drug which has been influencing world history since the 18th century. However, the history of opium dates way back. Although we can't exactly say where and when the opium poppy, which scientific name is Papaver somniferum, comes from, we can say that the history of human interaction with poppy starts around 5000 BC. Poppy seeds dating back to that time were found in the Mediterranean region. Just as poppy is used in many ways today, the Neolithic people were already using it as a food source, as an anaesthetic, as a ritual plant, and for suicide, in combination with hemlock. Later on, the first controlled cultivation of poppy occurred in Mesopotamia, around 3400 BC by the Sumerians, who gave it the name Wigil, the joy plant. In general, the Sumerian, Assyrian, Egyptian, Indian, Minoan, Greek, Roman, Persian, and all the other civilizations of the ancient world were using opium as it was the most potent form of pain relief then available. In fact, opium was widely used for pain relief until the introduction of morphine, which in itself was directly isolated from opium. But more about that later. Between 400 and 1200 CE, opium was introduced to China by Arab traders who also taught them how to use opium recreationally. Opium was used by the Chinese both medically as well as recreationally, although the distinction wasn't always clear. Its sometimes more questionable uses in medicine have changed over time. The Ebers papyrus from around 1500 BC, for example, mentions a way to stop a crying child using the poppy plant. In modern times, on the other hand, it used to leave the patients addicted to it after they were given opium to ease their pain. One such patient was Thomas de Quincy, the author of Confessions of an Opium Eater himself. Through the use of Paracelsus's laudanum, a tincture containing 10% opium by weight, opium was reintroduced to Western medicine in 1527, for the first time since it fell in oblivion after the fall of the Roman Empire. Paracelsus is nowadays better known for being the source of the quote, "All things are poisons, for there is nothing without poisonous qualities. It is only the dose which makes a thing poison." But what can we say about opium from a modern chemical perspective? The latex harbored in young seed pods of Papaver plants contains a wide range of highly psychoactive alkaloids. Alkaloid is just a fancy name for naturally occurring compounds that contain basic nitrogen atoms. These particular alkaloids found in poppy are known as opiates. The before-mentioned morphine, as well as thebaine, codeine, papaverin, noscapine, oripavine, and many more compounds belong to those opiates. The phenandrines, to which group morphine, codeine, and thebaine belong, are the compounds with the strongest effect on the central nervous system. Especially morphine and codeine, which in itself is broken down to morphine in the human liver, are notorious for their sedative and pain-relieving effects, as well as the incredibly fast developing dependence, which is reported to be excruciatingly hard to fight off, as withdrawal symptoms include restlessness, insomnia, and stomach pain. It is this downside to opium which was not only able to destroy single people's lives, families, but even countries and empires. Don't believe me? In my last video, I already mentioned how, because of China's monopoly on tea and other sought-after goods, Western countries trading with China were at a major disadvantage. The trade with the tea-hungry British Empire actually led to the deflation of British silver currency. In the late 18th century, the financial situation of the East India Company was so bad that the British took drastic measures. In addition to growing tea in their own colonies instead of buying it from China, the British also grew large quantities of opium in their own colonies. When the British began importing opium to China around 1781, recreational use of opium, which at the time was prohibited, was still rare. However, recreational use of opium quickly took off, so that in 1838, the British were selling roughly 1,400 tons of opium per year to China. There, it could be easily smoked through a pipe in an opium den. These were illicit shops found at almost any corner in Chinese trading cities, where one could go to consume opium. These were illicit shops found at almost any corner in Chinese trading cities, where one could go to consume opium. At first, patrons tended to spend only a couple hours there, enough for the drug to wear off again. But later on, they found themselves unwillingly spending more and more time and money in those opium dens, as they were the only place to indulge in the ecstasy of opium. In a tragic sense of irony, these opium dens were also established in Western cities by Chinese immigrants. However, the problem of opium was never as severe in the West as it was in China. Opium completely took the Chinese officials by the storm. Thus, when the government crackdown started in 1838, 27% of the male population was supposedly already addicted to it. At first, the countermeasures only applied to the Chinese population. After those proved to be fairly ineffective though, the Chinese government began to forcefully seize opium from British trading ships. The British, however, were not having any of this, and soon a couple small skirmishes between troops of the nations developed into full-scale land and naval battles. Born was the First Opium War in 1839. It ended in 1841 with the Peace Treaty of Nanking after a series of humiliating Chinese defeats. Regardless, China was still resisting, and so a second Opium War began in 1856 and lasted 4 years. But to no avail. Western dominance over China, which lasted almost 100 years, was already sealed by the smoke hovering over all the opium dens. As it turned out, this was not the last time the poppy plant almost brought a country down to its knees.
Калинка моя, в саду ягода, малинка, малинка.
In the late 1970s, when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, the poppy fields proved once more to be an important strategical asset. This time, however, the tables were turned. It was the Afghan insurgents that financed their resistance by means of selling opium to Western countries, including the Soviet Union itself. This was one of the many causes of the heroin epidemic that hit the Western world hard. Anyways, this is a story for another day. Thanks for watching. Come back next week when I talk about the history of magic mushrooms. Subscribe to be notified, and please don't forget to comment and like this video. If you love my content and want to support my channel, you're welcome to check out my Patreon page linked in the description below and on the screen. Farewell for now.